Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 307. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, March the 18th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. The topic of today's podcast, come off the ledge, the economy is fine. I've had countless conversations this week from a variety of individuals who are just losing their mind over the stock market, over these bank failures, over you name it. And I guess it's like a whole lot of other things. It's not that you shouldn't worry about it. You don't need to worry about it. It's not that you shouldn't be concerned about it. It's not that you shouldn't investigate it. It's not that you shouldn't try to learn more and read more about it from a variety of respectable and reliable sources. But there's no need to climb onto the ledge and threaten to jump off the building. There are no headlines from anyone reputable saying the New York Times says God is dead and the war has begun. None of that's going on, okay? As I've said before, and I'll always say, because it's kind of always true, and that is that we live in very interesting times, and the world continues to change. And as it changes, people don't like change. I don't like change. You don't like change. Business doesn't like change. Everybody is most comfortable with the status quo because they understand the status quo, because they've experienced the status quo. And when something raises its head that's different, people become concerned. And it's okay to be concerned, but there's no need to lose your mind. So today's essay, again, come off the ledge, the economy is fine. I will tell you in advance, this will not be a Pollyanna type of essay, because fine doesn't mean, you know what? Do whatever you want to do, because when you wake up in the morning, life is going to be just dandy. It doesn't mean that. It means that things are going to be fine. The country is not going to go bankrupt. You're not going to wake up one day and your bank will have failed and all your money's going to be gone. The Dow Jones Industrial Average will not go down to 6. Okay, none of that's going to happen. Okay, and I'm going to explain it with a couple of articles that I've read in a variety of reliable sources. Okay, getting back to that, a couple of things that went on this week that were very interesting, and to me, the first two actually are going to be for people in East Central Missouri, maybe Missouri as a whole, probably the Midwest as a whole. So if you're not in the Midwestern United States, this may not affect you, but you may want to listen to it anyway. There's an announcer here, I guess I'd say a former announcer, maybe a current announcer. His name is Dan McLaughlin. He was the voice of the St. Louis Cardinals for, I want to say, 25 years on Fox Sports Midwest. Then it was Bally Sports. Now who knows what it is, because they've all gone bankrupt, and the St. Louis Cardinals aren't going to get $70 million from them. They don't know how they're going to pay their players, but that's another story for another day. But Dan McLaughlin he was the voice of the Cardinals for many years, and he had his third DUI, and enough was enough. I think officially he resigned, but let's be honest, he was probably told to resign or he's going to get fired, because you can't be driving drunk 3 times and then talk to folks. You need to get yourself some help. This week, however, he was back, and he was back on one of the local sports shows filling in for a guy. I only got to listen to the very end of his broadcast, which was, the guy, he hasn't missed a beat. He's one of the best announcers out there, not just in St. Louis or the Midwest, but he's one of the best national announcers, in my opinion. The guy has demons. The guy has troubles. He's trying to address them. I'm not trying to belittle him. In fact, I'm going to give him compliments. Number 1, you sounded great. Number 2, I learned something from you. And it's something that I should have known for a long time, because I've had this Rodecaster audio box that I've been using for, 3 years at least. All right. And every now and then you hear me coughing. Well, Dan McLaughlin did that. And he said, I'm new here in the studio. I don't know about the cough. I haven't learned the cough button yet. Well, I've got a cough button on this stupid box. I've never used it. Those of you that listen regularly to the podcast, you see me just coughing. And I thought, you know what? You've got a cough button, dope. Go ahead and use it. So from now on, if I remember, you're not going to hear, instead you're going to hear something like that. In other words, it's going to be transparent to you. So maybe you won't have to listen to me coughing into the microphone anymore. So a very minor victory for me and hopefully for you as well, dear listeners. Number 2 of local concern is the weather. It's 19 degrees here. Now, I understand that it's still winter. And it will be winter until, Monday. And I understand in the Midwest it can be anything, okay? The average high today, I think, is 59 or 60 degrees. It's 19 now. And last Sunday, I worked in the shop on my Jaguar, and Dad came out. When I talked to him this morning, he said, I don't think I'm going to come out. It's 19 degrees. I said, yeah, I'm going to go there and do something, but I'm not sure what that's going to be. And I'm still not sure. But there's a big difference between an average high of 60 and a current temperature of 19 degrees. That's 41 degrees colder than it should be. Now, there's 2 things going on with that. First of all, it's going to be warmer than 19. I think they're saying it's going to be 30. Okay, that's still 30 degrees colder than what it should be for the high, okay? But an average is an average. The weather's like baseball, okay? If a guy's batting average is 333, that's 1 out of every 3 times he's going to get a hit. That doesn't mean that, okay, he's made 2 outs in a row, so this time he's going to be getting a hit. No, that could mean that he goes 0 for 10 and then 3 for 3 the next game, okay? It's an average. So I get it that the average is 60 and we're going to be sometimes above that, sometimes below that. But it still doesn't help with the fact that it's cold, man. It's just cold, and I'm tired of winter. Yeah, here you go, complaining strong. Yeah. You only spent 1 week in Puerto Rico in January. You didn't get to spend any time in the warm weather in February. No, actually you did. You were in California. So it's been the whole month of March. We're 18 full days into March, and you haven't had a chance to go someplace where it's nice and warm and cuddly and cozy. Okay, I get it. Fine. But it's still cold, and I still don't like it. But if you look at the long-range forecast, the 10 days out, it goes into early April. And it looks like, I think we got 1 day with a high of 48, but the high every other day is going to be in the 50s and 60s. So if we can get past this weekend, high today of 30, high tomorrow of 42, I think, but sunny both days. If we can get past those 2 days, that may be about it. And then I'll stop complaining because in less than a month, on April the 11th, I'm taking a plane to Las Vegas. I'm bringing all my gear out into Death Valley, and I'll be spending the better part of a week in the desert, where that time of year the highs in the 90s, the lows are in the 60s, so it'll be quite nice weather soon. The moral of that story, be patient because things are going to be fine. Also in the news, it looks like Finland is going to be part of NATO. Turkey and Hungary were the 2 countries who didn't want to let them in. Turkey has changed his mind, said, yeah, you can come on in. Hungary is expected to do that probably, if not this weekend, early next week. So by this time next week, Finland may be part of NATO. Now, why is that important? First of all, had Putin never invaded Ukraine, it wouldn't have happened because Finland wanted to stay neutral. They have a huge border with Russia, and they have a huge army. And they didn't want to be part of NATO because they didn't want to make Russia angry. Well, all they had to see was Russia invaded one of its neighbors, okay, who also shares a big border with Russia and used to be part of Russia once upon a time. Finland, that's why they wanted in. The interesting history with Finland is, well, first of all, it's a big country as far as size goes. But they've just got a little over 5 million people. I want to say 5.2, 5.4 million people living in the whole country of Finland, most of which in the very south near the capital of Helsinki, where it's a bit warmer. But there's an interesting history with Finland that Russia should pay attention to. They've had a variety of wars with Russia, and Russia has lost their share of wars. In fact, they've never taken over Finland per se. They've taken over territory. But what did happen is the last war they had with, the last war that Russia had with Finland was around World War II. It actually started in the 30s, went into the 40s to try and get a little bit of autonomy. Briefly during World War II, Finland aligned itself with the Nazis and were not officially part of the Axis, but they kind of played nice with the Nazis because they weren't playing nice with the Russians, okay? And it was kind of the enemy of your enemy is your friend type of thing. That didn't go well for Finland. At the end of the war, they switched sides. They fought the Germans. But even after that, they had to pay reparations to Russia because of what they did. They had to give back a bunch of land, close to 20% of their territory that they had. They had to give back to Russia, and they had to pay reparations. In 2020 dollars, $5.5 billion in reparations for the harm they did to the Red Army. Why do I mention that? Because I've said this before and I'll say this again. This war in Ukraine cannot go well for Russia. It absolutely cannot go well with Russia. They will not be taking over that country. A best case scenario is they get to keep the Crimea and a little bit of that other border territory they've taken. And they've lost over 100,000 troops dead. Okay. And the number climbs daily. The other day, they lost over 1,000 people in one battle because Putin keeps throwing these people into the meat grinder, and the Ukrainians say, okay, well, here they are, kill them all. And they do. Okay. A worst case scenario is this war ends, Ukraine gets all its territory back, and Russia has to pay a ton of reparations. They're already flat broke. Okay. That should be a lesson to Vladimir Putin. Oh, by the way, as of this morning, the world courts have charged Vladimir Putin with war crimes, and there's a warrant out for his arrest. Film at 11 on that. Talking about the weather, big on the news, and it makes me laugh, but I don't mean to be laughing at somebody's misfortune. But there's more houses in California that are sliding into the sea. And you've all seen them. If not in person, you've seen them on television or in movies. These beautiful homes in California on the coast or in the mountains that are on that stretch out over the ocean or over the mountains. And they're just, the vistas are just amazing because of the way they've built these houses. But eventually, the anchors to which the houses are attached erode away. It takes a long time because it doesn't rain very often, except for this year. And many of these houses are sliding into the sea, sliding down the mountain. You feel, oh my gosh, these poor people. And I do feel bad for them just because this is their home, okay? But think about it. People were never meant to live on something like that, okay? I don't care if that house has been there for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 100 years. Eventually, it's going to slide away because things change. All this talk of climate change, which I believe is real, all this talk of global warming, which I do agree is real. What's yet to be determined, does it have anything to do with fossil fuels? Because maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. But the world is getting warmer. The oceans are raising. And they say, look at all these poor people who are going to lose their seaside homes. Friends, that's just part of the risk. Because I'll tell you two types of people, two groups of people who are not against global warming. And that's, sure, the people that have the seaside houses, they don't like it because their property is going to get sucked in by the ocean eventually. But you know who's not against it? The people living right behind them. Because guess what? As soon as their home falls into the sea, they're now going to own seaside property. And their value will go up by a value of 5, 10, 15, who knows, okay? The other people, if you live in North Dakota, where, okay, it was 19 degrees here, in North Dakota, they may be saying it's 19 degrees this morning in June, okay? Do you think those people are embracing global warming just a bit? Sure they are. I guess it just depends on from what perspective you're looking at it as to whether things are good or things are bad. Which leads me to the second to the last factoid I want to run past before we go into the essay, and it has to do with lists. And you see these lists out, and lists have become a very popular item. They're interesting, if nothing else, but I'm here to tell you that I think that once upon a time, I think lists were built based on true facts, history, not just what somebody thought was good, okay? And the reason I say that is it was a list that came out recently, and this was a list of the best places to retire in the state of Missouri. Top 10 places, okay? Now, everything is relative. Everything has to do with what you think. I'm here to tell you that the people who made these lists either just made it up, looked at some statistics that mattered and others that don't matter at all, and ignored other statistics that are very important, or just thought, I'm going to goof on people and see what they do, which is why I'm not mentioning this list. I mean, I'm mentioning the list, but I'm not mentioning the source because I don't want to give the individual or the group that put forth the list any type of notoriety. And of the 10 best places to retire to in the state of Missouri, in the top 10, one of them was Ferguson. Now, do these people had they not had they not opened a newspaper in the last 6, 7, 8 years to see what's going on in Ferguson? Now, Ferguson is not a horrible place. There's a lot of places in Ferguson that are just fine. But in the last, I don't know, what is it, 5, 6, 7 years? I've lost count. They've burned it down, the downtown area. They've burned it down twice. Okay. You can't retire to a place like that. Yeah, I hear they say, well, the cost of living is low and you're close to highways and the weather ain't bad. Well, all that's true. But you can't say I'm going to retire here and hope they don't burn the downtown area down again. You can't do that. Old people can't put up with that. Young people shouldn't. Old people can't. The other one, Jennings. Now, for those of you in the St. Louis area, I'm going to say it again, Jennings, because right after I said that, you all fell on the floor, rolling and laughing. Jennings, when I was a boy, that was 50 years ago, Jennings was considered not the best place in the world, but you know what? It was small houses. It was what was called a blue-collar working-class neighborhood, okay? It was never great, but it was always a place that, you know what, if you don't have much money, you can buy a 900 square foot house for $25,000 and you can make it, okay? Jennings now today it's high crime. Those houses that were built after World War II are now 80 years old, and a frame house built during World War II was meant to last about 60 years. You're past that. In other words, there's a good chance that the house that you have has rotted timbers, has been infested with termites, and you probably can't sell it because it's not worth anything because it's getting ready to implode, okay? Jennings is a horrible place in which one can retire. So these lists, always take them with a grain of salt, please. Last story before we get into the essay actually is a segue into the essay, and it has to do with the Silicon Valley Bank. And that's a big deal to some people. And it's what many people are saying. In fact, it depends on the headlines you read. You know, okay, Silicon Valley Bank has failed, so everybody else needs to be careful because the next banks are all going to fail too. Here's the problem with that mindset. And it comes, I listened to a report by Dave Ramsey, who is I guess you could say he's an economist. He's more of a self-help guru, I guess. He gives financial advice. He's very good. I probably agree with about 90 to 95% of what Dave Ramsey has to say. The two things he says I don't agree with, and I've mentioned this before, is he says never, ever, ever get a credit card. And I say always, always, always get a credit card because of the points and rewards you can get with it. Just be disciplined and don't spend money you don't have. So sure, if you're not disciplined, don't get a credit card. If you are disciplined, credit cards are wonderful, especially the ones that pay rewards. And he also tends to, and I'm paraphrasing, basically, if you love Jesus, you're going to have money. He tends to go down that road, and I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. But other than that, the guy's fantastic. And he basically talked about this Silicon Valley Bank and why the average Joe shouldn't be concerned with the Silicon Valley Bank. And he threw statistics out there, and I don't remember them exactly, but most banks, when I say most banks, I'm talking about the banks that you have your money in, the banks that I have my money in. Commerce Bank, U.S. Bank, Bank of America. What are some of the other banks in the area? Regions Bank. Those are some of the banks in this area. Something like 80 to 90% of all their holdings are people like you and I, okay? And the FDIC insures holdings up to $250,000. In other words, if your bank goes bust and you've got $200,000 in that bank, FDIC, which is an insurance company, is going to give you your money back. You're going to lose nothing. And most banks are like 90-10, 80-20. Small investors like you and I versus the big boys. Silicon Valley Bank was the other way around. 90% of their holdings were venture capital guys, corporate raiders, tech gurus, people with millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in these banks, in this bank, okay? That's who it catered to. And they went broke, and there's, oh my gosh, they're broke, and the FDIC is not going to make these people whole. Well, of course they're not, because you're only insured up to $250,000. That's $250,000, not $250 million. So if you were dopey enough to put your $250 million in that bank and it failed, yeah, there's a good chance you're just going to get $250,000 back and you're on the hook for the rest of it. Sucks to be you. You should have done something differently, okay? So I guess you do need to be concerned about bank failures. If you had $250 million in SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, and you've lost it. If you're not in that group, don't worry, son, because your bank ain't going to fail anytime soon. And that's a segue into, let's get us in, walk us in off of the ledge, okay? And the financial news we've had has been anywhere from good to horrible. And it has to do with, people read this stuff and they say, you're losing your mind. Well, are you personally, let me ask you a question, dear listener. Are you personally losing your mind with the financial news? And the next question is, should you? There's an old adage that says knowledge is good, okay? And I agree with that to a point. But I read a real interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this week, and it kind of put that into perspective. Knowledge is always good, kind of, okay? But knowing more is not always good, at least when it comes to investing, okay? In fact, it could even be bad. Wall Street traders surround themselves with screens, and I've seen this at my son's place. These are screens crammed with blinking numbers and charts. You see this if you watch CNBC. In fact, most of these guys have 4 or 6 of these screens, sometimes 8 of these screens that they're trying to look at all at once to try to buy high and sell low. No, buy low and sell high. That's the way that's why I'm not a fund manager. But these fund managers, they can consult thousands of different Wall Street analysts with their forecasts and opinions before buying a stock. A lot of them, they follow Apple. They employ in-house analysts. They rent a Bloomberg terminal that costs about $30,000 a year, okay? These are the guys who do it for a living, okay? Now, retail investors, they used to rely on daily stock listings and a few basic ratios like dividend yield or a newspaper article, something like that. But now they've narrowed the information gap tremendously with access to armies of amateur analysts through services like Seeking Alpha and data feeds resembling those pricey terminals. In other words, a cheap version of the $30,000 Bloomberg terminal, which is ran by something.com. Now, there was a fascinating experiment. This was years ago and explains both the pros and cons that amateurs probably shouldn't adhere to, and they should probably save their money. This was back in 1973, and there was a psychologist, his name was Paul Slovic, and he gathered 8 talented handicappers, 8 of them, okay? 8 talented handicappers to guess the outcome of 40 actual horse races in 4 different rounds. Now, the names of the jockeys and the horses were hidden, but the handicappers could ask for 5 pieces of information from a set list of 88, only 5. And then they were asked to say how confident they felt. Well, the handicappers, they did pretty well, actually. They reached a 17% accuracy rate compared with 10% if they just guessed blindly. So in other words, if they had guessed blindly, they got 10% of the races right. But based on those 5 pieces of information, they got 17% right. So they almost doubled their accuracy rate. Pretty doggone good. Just 5 pieces of info on 88 that were available. And their confidence was at 19%. Okay, so 17% accuracy, 19% confidence. So it was pretty much on par with those 5 pieces of info. Now, in the next 3 races, they could ask for, instead of 5, they could ask for 10, then 20, then 40 bits of information. And the level of their confidence rose steadily. In fact, it got all the way to 34%. In other words, 34% of them thought, you know what, I'm going to get this race right based on now I have more information. Their accuracy, it did not budge off of 17%. So when they had 5 pieces of information, they were right 17% of the time. Then they went to 10, 17%, 20, 17%, 40, 17%. Now, at least knowing more didn't do any harm, so they never went down. Now, at a real horse track, though, or the stock market for that instance, detailed knowledge emboldens people to make riskier bets. And since most people aren't experts at horses or stocks, the average Joe reports making confident predictions filled with complicated calculations or claiming inside knowledge. Sometimes it just overrides common sense for amateurs, but sometimes it overrides common sense for pros too. In fact, back in October 2001, there were 5 Goldman Sachs analysts, and those guys are the gold standard. Goldman Sachs is the gold standard, okay? They wrote an 11-page report calling Enron still the best of the best, and they had extensive conversations with Enron top management. Their quote was, "Our confidence level is high." In fact, the stocks went up 8% over the next 2 trading sessions. But a mere 3 weeks later, Enron filed for bankruptcy. Too much information. The lessons of that meltdown didn't exactly endure. In fact, while millions of young investors opened their first brokerage accounts during the pandemic's first year because they were home, working from home, or day trading, many took cues from what they called finfluencers. And that's a term I'd never heard before, but they did talk about young people, and I'm not in that group. And these finfluencers spoke their language, at least they thought they did. They used pseudonyms, media reports like Reddit, which Reddit to me is just a bunch of dopes giving opinions, sometimes good, sometimes bad. If it's about a movie, I think it's fine. If it's about your stock investments, what are you doing? Now, this forum had more than 500,000 members following a single company, AMC Entertainment Holdings. Now, the problem with crowdsourcing research on social media is that people mainly find evidence that supports their existing thesis. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. And that's kind of how things work. And it's fine in sports. Okay, I'm a Cardinals fan. If there's an article out there talking about how the Cardinals suck and the Cubs are going to beat them, I'm not reading that article. If there's an article talking about how the Cardinals are doing well and they're going to beat the Cubs, I'm going to read that article. But that's sports, which if the Cardinals win the World Series or they lose 162 games, it really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. It's entertainment. Your stock market investments and your retirement, dear listeners, is not a ball game. It's important. Okay. Now, ideally, you'll find a tribe encouraging you to look at the other side. That's according to Rashi Khanna. He's a chief executive for StockTwits, one of the earliest investing-focused social networks with around 7 million users. He says bias is overwhelmingly bullish. Official Wall Street is hardly more balanced. Now, a report by FactSet last April showed that of almost 11,000 analyst ratings on stock for the S&P, fewer than 6% were sell recommendations, which means 94 were buy. How can that be? Now, bad takes abound, but legitimately valuable knowledge can overwhelm users too. Lee Drogan, he founded a firm called Itemize that queries pros and amateurs on things like earnings estimates. Its polls are more accurate than the consensus of the stock analysis, but not always. In fact, he says that snapping up every bit of data and expecting to work consistently often just tripped up its clients. In other words, too much information. Kind of like in baseball. What's his batting average? How many home runs? How many RBIs? Okay, that's basic information. What about WAR? What about OPS? What about OPS plus? What about, okay, stop it. Paying attention to 5 things in a highly efficient, systematic way will always beat paying attention to 50 in an undisciplined way. And again, that's according to Lee Drogan. The fire hose of information available to retail investors through their smartphones, that's even worse. I mean, if you're like the millennial-focused broker Robinhood, that was a disaster. Looking at your phone for Facebook or Instagram or looking at TikTok videos is fine, but looking at your phone every 5 minutes to look at a different social media site about your stock investments, which you're going to need for retirement, friends, that's horrible. In fact, one reason for the phenomenon called myopic loss aversion. Let me say that again. Myopic loss aversion. Now, the more often one looks at a financial amount, the more likely one is to see a loss. And since losses bother us more than gains, they spur turnover. In other words, sell, sell, sell. Investors who trade the least often make the most money, and vice versa. In other words, if you tend to buy and hold, you're going to do better than if you trade. That's even after taking into consideration, often there's a cost every time you make a transaction. Not always, but usually. Okay. Now, the explosion of financial data and the ease of instantly trading on it also creates more mistakes. 2 cases in point. Way back when, some investors made fortunes because they bought Cisco instead of Cisco. What are you talking about, Strong? Well, they wanted to buy, everybody had heard of Cisco Systems, the guys who make all the hardware for computers. But they bought, that's CISCO. But instead, they bought Cisco, the people who supply ketchup to restaurants. Okay? How could you make a mistake like that? But they did. They did it again. Zoom Technologies, they bought that. Instead of Zoom Video. And their Zoom Technologies was almost broke. Wow, I can buy Zoom Technologies for next to nothing? I'll buy it. Because that's the video service that everybody's using in work from home. No, it wasn't. It was a different company with a similar name. Okay? Now, there's a chart I'm going to go ahead and mention. And I know you can't see this, dear listeners, but I'm going to explain it to you. And it has to do with changes in the S&P 500. Okay? And basically, if you look at profits and loss for the S&P 500, if you look at any snapshot in time, any day, just pick a day, about 47% of the time, the S&P 500 is going to be down. If you look at a day, an individual day, today, tomorrow, yesterday, 10 weeks ago, 10 weeks from now, almost a 50% chance that it's going to be down. A little more than 50% that it's going to be up any particular day. If you take a snapshot in time of any particular month, about 38% of the time it's going to be down. If you take a snapshot of any particular quarter, about 30% of the time it's going to be down, 70% up. If you look at any 6-month snapshot, about 27% of the time it's going to be down. In other words, 73% of the time it's going to be up. If you look at any one year, about 20% of the time, you're going to have a losing year. But about 79% of the time, you're going to have a year that's up. 5 years, it gets even better, like 13%, 12%, it's going to be down. And if you look at it over a 10-year span, you're talking about something like 7% of the time, the market in any 10-year period is going to be down. Translation, 93% of the time in any 10-year period, that market's going to be up. Now, the moral of the story, dear listeners, is if you're looking to buy, sell, swap, and trade and make a big success in the stock market, you're probably going to lose. But if you're looking to buy and hold, buy blue chip stocks, buy stocks with good dividends, buy Zoom, not Zoom technologies, okay, you're probably going to be fine over the long haul because that's kind of the way it is. In fact, I read a statistic one time where it had to do with, it compared people who just buy the S&P 500 and then hold it forever versus people who go through a professional stock brokerage firm, not stock brokerage firm, but an investment firm, okay? Here, you manage my money versus I'm going to just buy the S&P 500 and hold on to it. Those who go with the firm that manages people's money, it's better, but it's not a ton better. And people who manage their own stocks or go with a guy like Jim Cramer or any of these other people, almost always, almost in every case, they'd have been better off if they'd have bought the S&P 500, put it in a closet, and then cashed it in 40 years later. Without all the hassle, without all the headache, without all the nightmare, without all the rigmarole, without all the stress, without all the fill in the blank. Because over time, over 10-year periods, any 10-year period snapshot, 93% of the time, the S&P 500 is going to go up. Now, does that work for absolutely everybody? If you're getting ready to retire, maybe not. I mean, I would say that if you're getting ready to retire, maybe you don't want all your money in the stock market. In fact, I would say you probably don't. You want to have a bunch of it in something that's safer because, I mean, if you're 80 years old, you could have a 10-year period or a 5-year period where it doesn't come back. Okay. So you've recovered by the time you're 85. Congratulations. What are you going to do? Are you going to buy that new Maserati now that the stock market's gone up? Probably not. So there's a time and a place for being conservative. There's a time and a place for not putting all your money in the stock market. But that's why you hire a professional. You can't look at those 3, 6, 9, 12 Bloomberg screens and know what you're doing, okay? Because that's not what you do for a living. That's what you do for a hobby. John Mozeliak, who's I guess he's not the general manager, he's the president of baseball operations, I think, for the Cardinals. He knows more about trading for players than you do because he has access to information. I mean, he will talk to his scouts personally and see what they said. And he trusts his scouts because he hired the scouts, okay? You've read a blog by somebody on Reddit. Don't think for a minute that because you read this blog, you know more than John Mozeliak. You don't. The same goes with investing. Just because you read something on a blog, don't think that you know more than a fiduciary because you don't. That's not what you do for a living. In fact, there's a real good chance that those same people who said, why, Silicon Valley Bank, it's gone broke, so is your bank. Cash in all your chips and hide it under your mattress. That may well have been the same blogger that said, hey, if you're going to retire to the state of Missouri, if you want a place with nice, cheap housing, decent weather, close to highways, buy a house in Jennings. Same. Well, that's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's my email address, JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. Send me your email address, and I will send you a link to the podcast upon publication so you can download it and listen to it at your leisure. That's it. We're done. I didn't have to hit that cough button not one time. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.